Yes, the sounds of Mr. 44 with Streets of Rage and Razor, Street Fighter 2 Guile's theme. It's all OC Remix stuff. I'm actually going to be playing a lot of OC Remix stuff for the next couple of weeks. I think it's about time that we actually promote some decent music, royalty-free music. I have absolutely no intention of putting any more money into the RIAA's pockets, so this will stay in the archives for everyone to enjoy. Right, let's get on with the show. It was very interesting, actually, to see what people thought about achievements. I was very surprised that, and I've just skimmed through pretty much all of the emails I've got, pretty much about 95% of people are actually in favour of achievements, which of course is a complete and total contradiction to what the forums might say. Just proves one thing: the forums are full of whiny lardy bastards that nobody cares about. Right, so let's get on with this. This is a forum, however, that you should care about, and I'm going to get a big shout out to Elitist Jerks at elitistjerks.com, who have a rather excellent forum. Very much excellent forum. A lot of good discussion as regards to bleeding edge, endgame, game mechanics, that kind of thing. A lot of very constructive criticism, a lot of constructive discussion indeed. So much so that Tigol, as you are aware, Tigol being Blizzard, actually decided to post on a forum, and he decided to post in a thread called Pacing the Release of Raid Content. And it's a very interesting post, and for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to try and dissect that post, and then see what we can get out of it. So let's have a look. And he says this. Let me see if I can link this in the channel first for those who need it. Those who are listening to the archive, you want to check out elitistjerks.com, look for the post pacing the release of raid content. Yep, have a look there, elitistjerks.com. Right, here we go. Tigol says this: I've enjoyed reading this thread, and I think there are a lot of valid points and views here. I think there is some nostalgia going on here, though. Either that, or we're watching a textbook case of the grass is always greener going on. In WoW 1.0, we faced many complaints about the lack of raiding options. We were often criticised with coming out with new raid content at a snail's pace. In fact, I challenge anyone to find a thread from Winter 2005 where people are talking about how awesome the pacing of raid content was. Some other things to remember: you could skip some of the AQ40 in your progression if you wanted to. This was viewed as an interesting debate. Having options is a good thing, yes? Not a design flaw. We're always looking to give players options, from PvP, multiple arenas, battlegrounds, to 5-mans all the way to raiding. My biggest criticism of our 10-person raiding game right now, I have a few, is that there are no options beyond Karazhan. We're fixing that, but you get my point. Players need options. I'll go ahead and make a controversial statement to illustrate a point. Let's pretend for a moment that Burning Crusade never came out and we were still in vanilla WoW land. The community as a whole would have eventually screamed bloody murder over the difficulty of the Four Horsemen. The Four Horsemen were considered one of the best tuned encounters in the game, but I'll argue that's because so few people actually progressed to the point of needing to beat them. And the ones who did beat them were okay with going to extreme measures to do so. Consumables, world buffs, server transfer for tanks in 4-piece Dreadnought, you know the drill. A fight that requires 8 tanks, let me just be very, very clear about this, is not acceptable to the raiding community as a whole. A fight that requires 8 tanks was acceptable to the Bleeding Edge only and their fans, and only because it separated them from the rest. That's not because it's a fun raiding experience. How fun was it for the Hunter who got benched for Warrior number 8? How fun was it for the guild who lost their main tank when his server transferred to be part of one of the world firsts? For the place and time, Four Horsemen were great. They were beatable and they were mostly bug-free. While we're on the topic of Naxx, I want to remind everyone that during its initial opening, almost all of the bosses died in the same period that the Black Temple bosses were dying. People forget that because of the Four Horsemen wall, if raid content is tuned correctly, it will die relatively fast. Unless it requires some sort of progression check, an Ixia Cloak, resist check, blah blah blah. Even straight up gear checks are very dicey. More often than not, that leads to excessive raid stacking rather than a true gearing up experience. Another thing to keep in mind is the PTR. In order to release the highest quality encounters, we put the content on the PTR. This happens with Naxx as well. It's not surprising that the 3 EU guilds who have progressed the furthest in the Black Temple are also the guilds that spent the most time on the PTR. While it's only taken them 2 weeks to kill most of the content in BT, we've been watching them rep in the dungeon for 2 months now. Properly tuned and accessible raid content will die. It's okay, we'll make more. That's what we do for a living. What's really important is for the content to be enjoyable to do for more than just one clearing. Because after all, your priest wants his shoulders off of boss X, or your tank wants his shield off of boss Y. It should be epic to kill a boss like Illidan or Kael. It shouldn't be epic because no one is doing it, because they're overtuned or bugged out. Yes, he did just say... I should probably send him that sample. Anyway, my opinions on Black Temple. Nagentus is tuned perfectly. We wanted a reward boss for getting in. Akarma is a tad easier than we had hoped for, but he's really a cool, fun fight, so it works out. Reliquary of Souls is just where we wanted it to be. It's very hard. Terran is a hard fight. until people know what they are doing, at which point it becomes easy. The more guilds that kill Terran, the easier the fight becomes for everyone. I think the raid game is in a very good place right now. Raiders of all skill levels and time commitments have a variety of options. There are some extremely challenging and rewarding fights in the game. Kael, Reliquary, Archimonde, Illidan. Raid tuning walks the razor blade. Things that make raids seem more challenging, trash, raid stacking, consumables, resist checks, attunement, limited access, limited tries, are usually perceived as tedious or progression blockers, and the complaints fire away. But I'll reiterate, a well-tuned raid boss, even a very hard and complex one, will die quickly if it's tuned properly and bug-free. I'll leave you guys with a question. How many people posting in this thread that the Black Temple is too easy have actually killed the boss in the Black Temple? Interesting. And very frank. I've got to actually say that I've got a lot of respect for Tugol for actually saying that. Because let's face it, this is not the kind of thing that we usually get. We don't see this kind of thing on the forums. This is not... To be fair, it's not even a strong PR thing. I mean, if you were to go on Blizzard's standard whitewash PR procedures, this is not good. It's not actually a good idea at all. But from a player perspective, a PR player perspective, it's a very strong indication that people are listening. And more importantly, the people who actually can influence what is being spoken about are listening. Now, let's have a look at this. Let's see what we can make out of this particular post. He says, obviously, the Four Horsemen. People do, it is true, people do actually consider the Four Horsemen to be one of the best tuned and challenging encounters in the game, but I would have to agree with him. It was very much a case of ZOMG 8 tanks in a raid. And yeah, that's not entirely inconceivable by any stretch of the imagination, and let's also face it that the 4-piece Dreadnought was not actually required. It made the fight quite a lot easier, but it was not required by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, he's making the argument that raid stacking is bad, and I would kind of have to agree with that, but to be quite honest, Karazhan to some degree is very much guilty of that, although from what I've seen of the later encounters, they don't seem to be as. Karazhan is a place where there are bosses which really do benefit from having certain classes, and being a 10-man, you kind of got to expect that. When they scaled everything down to 20-mans with Zul'Gurub and AQ20, at least early on when people were being challenged by it, they were taking certain classes over others. And let's face it, in a 40-man raid encounter, you do have a lot more space to bring a little bit more of a variety. Now, of course, the problems that you then get from scaling down and requiring the stacking of certain classes is, of course, that people get put on the bench. People get frustrated, and that's not a good thing. And from a business perspective, that is definitely not a good thing, because people who get frustrated and can't raid, well, they're not going to be playing for much longer, because that's the end game, and a lot of people are interested in the end game, and so, well, they should be, because that is the main content. It is right there in plain sight as the big thing within WoW. The end game is raiding. There's not even a question about that, so I don't really see why people would argue. But yeah, so again, a very valid point from Tiggle there. Very, very valid indeed. And yeah, progression through Naxx did take a while. I think, to be honest, he is exaggerating to some degree. Guilds didn't really progress that fast. I remember we used to do a feature actually on farm status called Naxx Watch, and that lasted for quite some time. And I do not recall everything being killed within a week and a half. Certainly not. I do not recall that happening. As far as I'm aware, it didn't. So, I think he's certainly over-exaggerating there by some degree. But then again, you've also got to take in mind that Naxx had almost double the bosses the Black Temple actually has. And the way that it was working in Wings, well, yeah, Black Temple doesn't work that way. So, okay, I'll give him that. That's relatively reasonable as regards to an assessment. Now, we're looking at as well. I hate him so much. I'm going to kill Speedy F40. This is what I get for staying on vent. Stab, stab. Anyway, the idea of content dying too fast, that can be perceived as a problem, but the question is, by who? But who is considering that a problem? I mean, I was chatting to some of the guys in Nihilum after they killed Illidan and after they killed Archimonde, and the general consensus was not ZOMG, we are now finished and have nothing to do. It was actually, yay, summer holiday. Understandable. You know, these are real people. I don't know why anyone has the impression of anything otherwise. Raiding and over and over and over again can get somewhat tedious. Very much so. So the question is, who exactly isn't benefiting from raid content being knocked down that fast? Who is being harmed by it? No one really, to be quite honest. Yeah, guilds go for world firsts, but that's fine. If they're going for world firsts, then as long as the content was relatively challenging, at least for a while, I don't really see a problem with that. I do enjoy challenging encounters, but that's not to say that these encounters are not challenging. You're looking at Nihilum, who are, at the moment, best in the world. You're looking at Curse, who are also on Illidan. They are an extremely good guild. You're even looking at only a handful of guilds that are even progressing in Black Temple, most getting stuck at Essence of Souls, and understandable. So who's it hurting? Nobody. That's the thing. Raid content getting knocked down that fast is not actually harmful by any stretch of the imagination. Because they're going to go back in that dungeon and they're going to go get the gear. They're going to explore what else is in the loot table. They're going to gear up. This was the way it always used to be. When raid content wasn't released so fast, it was about going into the instances time and again and getting your gear. And getting gear is fun. You can't really deny that. Acquiring gear is a fun thing to do. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever, in my honest opinion. I think that is very, very valid. There is no reason whatsoever for people to whine that, oh, well, do you like getting gear? Lol's bad. No, that's not how it works at all. So, to be quite honest, I would think that the pace that it's getting knocked down right now is not necessarily a bad thing. The funny thing is the amount of people we've had complaining over the idea that, well, we're never going to get to see this content, and pulling statistics out of their ass. 99.9% of people are never going to see this content. Says who, exactly? If the stuff is getting knocked down that fast, and people are saying, ZOMG, it is getting knocked down that fast, then what exactly is the problem? That shows that it's very, very beatable rather quickly. So if Nihilum can beat it in 2 weeks, then maybe your guild can make some progression in 2 months. Or maybe 6 months, 8 months. What's the problem with that? You intend to be playing then, don't you? The only problem I see with that is people who intend to quit within a month and want to get as much content done as possible before that. Or the people who just are self-defeatist, and there are a lot of them. An awful lot of them, in fact. Self-defeatist people that just say, well, we're never going to reach this. Well, no, with that attitude, of course you're not going to reach it. By any stretch of the imagination. But that's what endgame's about. You work at it. You try and get yourself a good group of people together, and you work from encounter to encounter, and you get more proficient at what you do, and eventually you will get there. And I've made the argument before, there always has to be something ahead of you. And right now, the vast majority, except of course for Nihilum, there is nothing wrong with that. There's lots of stuff ahead of them. Nihilum have farming ahead of them, and a summer holiday. I don't see anything wrong with that either. Like, right, okay, so you're integrating WoW with your real life. Great. Nothing wrong with that at all. Why would there be? They want to take a break. They want to maybe do some arenas. But Nihilum are always a guild that set their own goals, at least from what I could see, and a lot of endgame guilds are like that. They set their own goals, and in my opinion, that contributes to their success. People who are asking, what are my goals? Well, they're kind of missing the point. Use your brains. The content is there to be experienced. And it is right there. Just go and get it. So yeah. Conclusion. Can we draw one from Tigol's post? I really cannot, to be quite honest, pick fault with it. And that is very, very rare. Very rare for anything Blizzard has said. My show is based on picking fault with what they say. But in this case, and I've got to give him props for this. Well done to Tigol for actually posting this. It's good. There's nothing really wrong with this post at all. Go and have a look at it if you don't believe me. I've read it all out to you already. Have a look on elitistjerks.com. Go and have a look at that post. It's a good, solid post. And yeah, we're not done yet. That is quite obvious. He said it himself. His job is to make more raid content. The more raid content there is, the more stuff there is for people to do, the better it is. The longer people will play. As long as they don't get bored of it, that's great. As long as there's something ahead of them, that's great. And as far as I'm concerned, if the Bleeding Edges are willing to wait for the next instance and really have no complaints, at least they haven't started complaining yet. I certainly haven't seen Nihilum complain on their site or complain on the forums. I haven't seen Curse complain or any of the other big guilds that have got this far who are maybe seeing the end in sight. They're not complaining that this stuff is easy. They're not complaining that they're clearing it too quickly, there's nothing to do. It's odd. It's odd to see that the people who are actually complaining are those who aren't in it. And while there are a few examples of people who will still come up with this idea that are actually trying Black Temple, I think they do need to realise that wiping on bosses for months upon months upon months is not actually a fun experience, especially when there's no reason for it. It's the same principle as dying to the same boss over and over and over again in any other game. If you're not making any progress on it, it's not fun. If you don't see a change, it's not fun. If you're wiping for no good reason, it isn't fun. You have to be progressing all the time. Progression is important, and if you're not progressing, and I believe that, Four Horsemen was a prime example of this, people were simply not progressing due to the fact that you needed 8 tanks, or you needed a certain level of gear, then people get frustrated. And you don't want frustrated people, because frustrated people are dangerous money. Money that may not necessarily be coming in the next month. You're listening to Blue Please here on WoW Radio with myself, Total Biscuit. I think it's time for a little bit of Nupcake News. Enjoy. Nupcake News! Stop that. Welcome to this week's edition of Nupcake News. Coming up later in the program, the DPS potential of Retribution Paladins. Plus a look at the gangs of animated characters who repeatedly prey upon lone travelers, killing them and making off with their virtual belongings. This is a special message from WoW Radio for the Washington Post. You're stupid. Thank you. But first, Blizzard have announced that World of Warcraft will be closing its doors soon as one guild has apparently beaten it. The actions of Nihilum reportedly caused Tigol to be, quote, very upset and a little bit tearful, with observers reported as saying, Illidan was his best friend. How could you, you bastards? As one guild has now beaten all of the endgame content, there is very little purpose in any of the other guilds even attempting it, and players are leaving by the millions. One Karazhan guild leader is quoted as saying, we already know that 99.9% of the WoW population are never going to see this content. Now it's been proven very beatable very quickly. We're leaving. Since we'll never see it either. Logic? Only low-lifers have that logic. GTF out, Raider. Fortunately for us, Blizzard has announced World of StarCraft, a space-based MMORPG set in their popular Diablo universe. Nupcake News is the only credible news organization in the world, and as long as our reporter isn't preyed upon by a gang of animated characters, this is another special message for the Washington Post. Did I mention you are stupid? We should be able to bring you a exclusive preview of the game right now. Ted? Thanks, Ernest. I'm here with Tassadar of the Protoss, who apparently has a quest for me.
Help me make some stew. Come back with the following ingredients. 3 stringy zergling meat, 3 hydralisk snouts, 3 firebat eyes, 3 Vespine gas.
As you can no doubt quite clearly see some very original concepts in this game, let's take a quick look at the PvP. Nerf Zerglings. Nerf Siege Basilisks.
Nuclear launch detected.
Sounds both balanced and highly exciting. But time is short. Quickly, let's move on to endgame raiding. Well done, Raid. We successfully downed the battlecruiser. Now, let's take a look at the loot. Pulse Rifle of the Beaver. Paladins? Hunters? Anybody? I am not wasting on that piece of crap. What the hell is this? A Yamato cannon? Obviously a hunter weapon. Look at the spirit on it, and plus healing too. Perfect for men Zergling. So, my thoughts? Excellent and original. I can't wait to see the end boss. Oh really? What's the end boss exactly? Korea! This has been Nupcake News. Good night.